Hello, everyone, and welcome. I apologize again. My voice is not too great. I'm fighting something, but we'll get through it. And so I'd like to welcome you to our Stress Mastery training session. I guess we can call it number 2 because we did one several months ago before the summer with James. And I want to thank James for giving up his time again to work with us here this evening. So the goal this evening is to have James and I demo for each of you a role play and our discovery consult role play. And I'm going to let James set it up. And then James may have to leave at the top of the hour. And I want to hold, if I can, hold each of you just for another few minutes just to introduce what's going to happen now starting next week with respect to ramping up some exposure, if you will, of the executive wellness program through letting you guys into Rizuku. And I'll talk more about that at the top of the hour. And so I think without further ado, I'm going to ask each of you if you could turn off your cameras and mics, and we'll open up for some Q&A on the end. If you have any questions in the interim, please just post them in the chat as you would kindly do. And if everyone's turned off their cameras and their microphones, I think we are ready to get started. So James, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And again, I've been through the sickness that you've been through, and I still have a frog in my throat. So, but I feel great, and I hope you feel better too.
Thank you.
Well, today we're going to play a little role play, which Lisa's going to play herself. so much for a role play. She's going to be Lisa. So, as you all know, every one of you has taken the SMQ. You've received your feedback, and you have a pretty good idea of what that's all about. But the question is, how do you use it with a client? And there's no perfect way to do anything. So right now, Lisa's already, we're pretending, but Lisa's already met with me once. She's taken the SMQ, and I've given her the opportunity to look at the Stress Mastery report on her own and with some challenges to say, take a look at the report, think about the areas that are most problematic for you. And even though Lisa doesn't indicate that she has a lot of stress in her life, I'm sure it changes from day to day, like all of us. She did identify a few. There are some areas that we want to work on. So I'm going to share Lisa's private report so that we can all look at it, and then I'm going to ask Lisa to tell us, what did you learn from it? What did you get out of it? What meaning did you find in some of the areas that we looked at? And we're going to start at the global level and then go a little bit deeper. And when you're working with a client, that's generally the way to go. Every client is different. You may have a client that just something stands out so great that all you can do is focus on that, and that's fine too. But so you have to be really flexible with the SMQ because it's situational. Somebody might have a stressful week or month, or big events are happening in their life, and others, and that may change. And so we have to take it in with a grain of salt at some point. So, okay.
I can just before we get going. Hi, Gail. We're just starting our role play. Welcome.
Hello, Gail.
And I've just asked everyone, for the purpose of the role play, if everyone would turn off their camera and mic, and then we'll come on screen again. So thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so James.
Let's shoot forward. Well, Lisa, good to see you again. I'm going to share your Stress Master report, but as I do this, we'll take a little bit of time to get this going. And then we're going to pull up Lisa Kelly.
Voila.
So Lisa, as you know, I sent this to you the other day, and you had a chance to look it over. As you recall, there's some instructions at the beginning, how to interpret your stress report. And just so you know, and I'll give you a little preamble here before you share what you gain from it, there are 3 areas that we typically look at when we're looking at stress. One are the warning signs of the behaviors that we often reveal to the world and even to ourselves, internal and external, that are need to be attended to. The second area are stressors, things that impinge upon us that we might call them triggers. And the third is stress effects. So the SMQ looks at these three areas, and stress effects are physical and emotional. I also shared with you at the beginning of the report that you should take a time to look at the big picture. After you've kind of looked at the whole thing from on high, if you will, then you ask you to say, well, go a little deeper and see if you can identify some of the areas that you think are important. And what's important is not what I think, it's what you think is important.
For sure.
And I may have a different view, but that's okay. Third, we want to go a little bit deeper down to the actual molecular level, some of the specific questions. And these are guidelines I've given to you. I'm sure you've had a chance to read them, so I won't go in any deeper. And then the last 2 points was, after we're all said and done, I recommend you get another perspective. Share your results with somebody that you know, who cares for you, that you respect, and ask them if they think how you scored on some of these items was how they view you, and get a discussion going. And this could be very revealing, because it really helps people to step back and say, oh, I scored 3 on that, but I'd rate you as a 5. Well, why do you do that? Then you can get a discussion. And then ultimately, the goal of this whole coaching program that we have for you is to take action and to find the direction you want to go, the tools and ways in which you can get to where you want to go. So having said all that, here's your report. Tell me a little bit, what did you get out of this as you look at it from on high, as well as when you went into it specifically?
Well, thank you, James. So in looking at my report, and I did this some time ago, but I did review it again recently, and I don't think there's a lot has changed. So I'm pretty true to character or form. So yes, as it shows on the screen, perfectionism showed up pretty high. I am aware of that, and I'm definitely working on it. The time urgency, definitely, that's still probably always will be a challenge for me. And then the tension under the A7.
Down here, there you go.
Yes.
So the 3 areas that you're indicating, which are obviously what showed up to be high risk. And just so you know, your scores, just because they're high risk, doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to cause you a physical or emotional or problems with people, but it can. And in fact, we know that the higher the score, the tendency is to be, there will be challenges for people. So let's go ahead and start with that. Did you see anything else in there that kind of stood out?
I guess one other, that the physical stress effects, which I think sort of manifest themselves probably from these others that are higher risks, right? And that scored as a medium to low risk.
Right.
And I think that would be the case largely. The life work satisfaction. My work satisfaction is really high, but there's always that trade-off, right? When you're so intense about your work, there is that risk that you're imbalancing the work-life balance, right? So I think definitely I've recognized that it's something that my husband and I have talked about, and we're working on, but we can get to that in a bit, if we will.
Sure. Well, I noticed, and you scored low on that, meaning basically you have a very positive view of your career, your job, your coworkers, who are basically yourself and your husband. And so it's really a positive area. So there are some positives in here. So before we talk about the challenges, do you see any areas that might be more positive and helpful, and maybe a buffer to stress?
Overall, you mean from my report?
Yeah.
Well, I think the fact that I love what I do, which sometimes can be a detriment because I do spend a lot of time in what I do, which can throw off, a bit of a work-life balance, if we want to use that word these days.
Sure. Got a two-edged sword.
It is a two-edged sword for sure. And the rest of it, I think, because of that intensity I'm a big dreamer. I have some really big goals carved out for myself in the past couple of years, but especially this year and going into next year. So I have to find ways to mitigate the impacts of that on my life in terms of, imbalance, right?
Well, one of the things that I noticed, and before we talk about the challenges, is that you tend to have a pretty good sense of internal control of your life. If you look at your burnout scale, it's very positive. You're not sad. You're enthusiastic. Underachievement, to many people, score high on underachievement because they feel they're not accomplishing what they want to do, and so they're disappointed and stressed out. So these are positive in terms of disappointment. Again, a few people here. There's one that maybe a few people disappoint you, but with a score of 3, you always want to balance the good, the things that really work well, with things that maybe you want to improve, like we all do. We all want to improve. So having said that, overall, I'll give you my sense, and then we can go a little bit further.
Sure.
The anger level is pretty low. The one area that I think stood out that was really kind of interesting was, hey, you're pretty competitive.
I am.
And so, that may or may not be a problem. And I think only you would know that there are some people that I've known that they're never happy because they can't ever, they got to be the best at whatever they do. But at a 4, it's probably situational. But again, as we go into this may be some area that you might want to say, maybe I should back away a little bit.
Right.
So the 3 areas that you mentioned, let's go into those now. Of the 3, perfectionism, time urgency, and tension. Does any one really stand out as being what you really would like to work on?
Probably the time urgency. The perfectionism, I think since I did this, I've really been working on that. But specifically, I guess the time urgency definitely is one I need to work on. And I'll give you examples of how that manifests in my life in just a minute.
Okay. Well, actually, why don't you share that a little bit right now? How do you see it happening to you, and how does that affect your relationship with your spouse, your husband, and maybe others?
Yeah. Well, I'm not typically one of these that reaches for my phone typically first thing in the morning. However, I noticed this past few months I'm doing that more and more. And I may even reach for the phone and check my email before I even get out of bed. And then I'm voice responding or setting up, which sometimes is not bad, because I can voice respond and I can get it off my plate. I'm going through a menopausal stage right now where I'm waking up in the wee hours. Like yesterday morning, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I just having sleep issues, partly because of the infection too. But I got up and did something on the computer and I went back to bed. So I had it off my mind and I went back to bed. But I prefer not to be waking up at 4 in the morning and feeling the need to go to the computer, right, to offload my brain. But that's the sort of time urgency. And maybe it's part of being an entrepreneur. I have a lot of balls in the air, a lot of different programs I'm winding up or launching. And so that's really something I need to address, of how I can better manage that. And also, I teach mindful eating. I'm still working on that. Okay. I find myself still sometimes standing at the counter eating or rushing through my meal, maybe not taking a full hour to decompress during the lunch hour so I can recharge myself for the afternoon. Things we typically...
What do you think is driving that?
Just because I know what it is. I've put so much pressure on myself, so many goals. Maybe it's the stage of my life. I've probably got about another 5 or 6 years before I consider myself sort of moving into retirement mode. And I've got some big goals and big dreams. And I'm very efficient, or I like to think I am, at what I do. And so I think, I can knock off all those goals. I can do that, And then I realize one of my weaknesses is not really taking time to really estimate and plan out how much time something's going to take.
So actually, the planning and planfulness and mindfulness that you know about and you preach to others would be something that if we could find a way in which to work together to get that amped up, if you will, to the point where you are taking a little bit more time and more planful time, because people like yourself and even myself, we're on the go, and we don't often sit down and just say, okay, where do I really want to go, and what's the most important thing I should be doing right now? So I think putting a plan in place, and one thing I should say, Lisa, is that part of our program in coaching is to build a commitment for change, which is like a little form that we use at the end of our program, and we work towards it, where we actually specify behaviors, attitudes, and things that we want to change, and a plan to make it happen. So if you think about as we coach each other and we work together, that's something we want to move forward to, not just to identify these issues, but to find solutions for them. What can we do? And again, we could jump into that, but I think right now we're really just trying to tease out and understand some of the more specific areas. So for example, it's very simple: move, walk, and eat rapidly. If you were to put a mindfulness program together for somebody that was moving and talking and moving fast, hurrying others around, what would you say? How would you put that together? What would you do?
Here's the irony, because I teach all this, I'm still working on practicing it myself, right? I'm mindful of what I need to do, so I'm at least partway here.
Well, you got it.
And I do catch myself in the moment. So if I were to like maybe assess myself, I would give myself props and higher grades for the fact that I'm mindful about it, and I put some things in motion, like for example, around the planning of these goals of mine. So I'm probably a little further along in maybe the solution in than what I'm giving myself credit for. And just to talk about that. So just quickly, like the other day I set out all my goals for the next month and into 2020. And I mapped them out of when I need to do them. And I think for me, as long as I got them mapped out, then it takes that stress and pressure off my mind, because I'm very good at execution. If I have something written down and I say I'm going to do something on a day, I do it.
Okay.
Otherwise I know it has to be done and I'll execute, but it's not in the most strategic or linear or sequential fashion to get me from point A to point B. So
perfect. And again, I think what you said at the very end of this document, where it shows how you have evaluated your stress at home and work, you basically said, no, that's pretty low. Well, that means that you have internal mechanisms that you are using to mitigate and reduce, keep the stress down, even though these behaviors left unchecked could be a problem for other people. You have, and I want to reinforce that, you've got some good techniques. That doesn't mean you don't, it's up to you, want to make the changes you want in these areas, which I would agree would be good. And just go ahead.
I was just going to say, like in terms, and I'm very self-aware, like when I get nervous or even too excited, being the East Coaster, I tend to talk really fast, and I see that come back when I watch myself sometimes on webinars. So another strategy I did recently was to help control that anxiety and the nervous tension. Sometimes I enroll myself back in Toastmasters. And last night I had to do a Toastmaster role, and I'm really finding myself now really being more pensive and really taking my time in my speech delivery, both webinars or even in my public speaking, and Toastmasters has been really great for that. So that's another example, I think, of some of the solutions that I'm starting to self-identify and getting kind of excited, because I feel taking a little more control now of some of this time urgency that we've identified here before.
Well, as you know, one of the behaviors or personality factors in stress mastery is belief in a sense of control. So the belief in the sense that you have some control over what you do empowers you.
Yes.
Those who do not feel that they are in control are stressed and have much more problems. So again, we're identifying behaviors that have underlying emotions that kind of trigger it. But again, because you're here today, not because you're complaining of stress, but because you want to do something to maybe refine and improve your own life. And that's what this is all about. So for example, in the perfectionism, there's two areas that you said, yeah, I scored high. Well, perfectionism and excellence are very closely related. And I want to just say, maybe I'm making an assumption I shouldn't, but I think you're more in the realm of seeking excellence than overly being perfectionistic in all that you do. But only, again, on a personal level.
That's absolutely, that's a really, if I may say, that's a really good assessment. And I guess it shows in nothing other than even as simple as the rebranding of our program, where I've called ourselves the Workplace Wellness Center of Excellence. And so for better or worse, sometimes that title now puts an added pressure on me, because it's not perfectionism. You're absolutely right. I want to do excellence. I want to achieve what I know I'm capable of, because I know what I'm capable of, and I'm capable of pretty great things, and there is an excellence to everything I do. So I appreciate you bringing out that distinction.
Well, the second area of importance in stress mastery is a sense of commitment to what you do. And so if feeling in control is good, having a sense of commitment to do something well is also a buffer against stress. So having you say that really reinforces it. The one area that I would bring up to you to think about is delegation. And one of the reasons people don't delegate is it costs money. The other is they fear that it's not going to be done as well as you could do. And I think what the lack of delegation often results in is tension, stress, because you're really forced to do something that is not as you shouldn't be doing, perhaps, because maybe you're better off doing something else.
Right.
What do you think about the delegation issue?
Well, again, interesting you should bring that up, because just this year I hired a writer, and it has cost me a lot of money, but it's an investment well worth it, because another big goal next year is to finish or start, to keep working and finish our book by the end of or mid part of the year. So she's going to be helping me ghostwrite and edit the book, and she's been working with me over the past few months, helping me get to know workplace wellness and my writing style and her writing style. So this was done prior to that. So I've really recognized the need to delegate and outsource. I have to if I want to achieve these goals. So I think that's something I have recognized, and I have a graphic designer, I have a website gal, I've got a mentor now, and I've got who's helping me with the book and other things, and I've got this writer. So I would say I'd probably rate myself a little lower on that now. Again, appreciating I did these scores quite some time ago.
Sure.
And so,
okay, well, that's really good that you are doing that. So again, you look at things, again, the third area of stress mastery is you look at things as a challenge. So you have challenge, commitment, and dedication to making changes. Now, back to the last area here, tension. Now, if you go up to here and you've got your walk, talk, and eat rapidly, that's just one more example of high levels of tension. Right. So because these areas tend to be a little bit high, they kind of spill into the other area of
yeah, absolutely.
So I think when we put our plan together, and we work together to get our plan together, I think what we want to focus on, wouldn't you agree, are these yes. behaviors, these kind of little areas that would make your effectiveness even better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we really distill all this, and when I look at everything that I've just spoke to, that I've recognized that I'm doing things, the area that I still am working on, and I'm getting better, but I got a long ways to go. So I need to maybe work with you to help find other strategies to carry me further. But cool. Just before we met, for example, I sat down with Deepak and we did a little meditation together. So I'm trying to build in those little meditation periods. I've been sick, so my exercise is really off, and I know that totally throws me off, and it's too easy to put it off when you feel you're not. But I could even be sitting on a bike and doing that. So there's things I could be doing that I'm not building in time for, and I know I have to make a commitment to myself to do that.
Well, that's great, and I think what we've come up today with is a beginning mini plan for some of the areas we want to work on. I would say that any one particular behavior could be focused on, but I think these make the most sense. Next time we meet, we'll talk about stressors and effectively talk about what you can and cannot change. But I think for now, you've done a great job of really beginning to understand and nail down the key areas, and I appreciate the.
So if I may ask, I don't want to direct this conversation necessarily, but if I may
go right ahead.
If I may ask, now that we're winding up our session together, is there anything that I should focus on or work on between now and when we meet up again?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was about to just jump into that.
There you go. Sorry, I didn't tickle your thunder.
So.
Oh yeah, my mind doesn't shut down too easily.
No. I'm glad you said that. So here, as you know, I will pull up the Stress Mastery Guide. Now, I'm going to give you a item which we call the Stress Mastery Guide, and this is really the nuts and bolts of the program, our coaching program. It's a guide. It's a workbook. What you're going to get today is a 66-page booklet. In this booklet, you're going to find that each of the areas we talked about today are discussed and ideas presented in terms of things you can do, things you should know about how to change those particular areas. I'd like you to pick the 2 or 3 areas we talked about today: the time orientation, perfectionism, intention, particularly. And I would like you to read the whole thing, and you should begin to read the introduction so you understand the meaning of risk. And there's a worksheet in each one of these areas. If you would begin to look at that worksheet and answer the questions that are raised in there, and I'll show you a couple right now, so you see what we're talking about. Okay.
And how will I get this book? Is it going to be sent to me digitally, or?
I'm going to give it to you right now as you are here. And here's one right here. Okay. This is the time urgency exercise. So not only do we talk about the meaning of time urgency, what it means, what to know and what to do, you're going to be able to see solutions, things that you might be able to do. And using a highlighter, a yellow, blue, green, whatever you want, highlight just those particular ideas and thoughts and areas you think would be relevant to you and you'd like to follow up on. And so when you come in next time, we'll be able to hone in on what you would like to do. Right. And then when you get to the time urgency exercise, here again are the same questions. And then it says, what does it mean to score high on this? How or in what way can these behaviors affect you? And answer these questions, and you'll discover that you will have a greater appreciation for how our behaviors reflect our internal emotions and feelings and stress. And that getting a handle, by changing behaviors, we actually can change our feelings. In fact, if we slow down, we often feel more relaxed. Right. If we heard the speech of others and we step back and relax and listen to others, we're more relaxed. So if you look at it from that point of view, and then our goal will be at the very end, and I'll show you that right now, is to fill out this form. This will take a little bit of time because you want to make the right decision for you. You're going to make a commitment for change. What have you learned about yourself by taking the SMQ? Select the area of behavior you want to work on. What would you like to change? What will prevent you from being successful? What will you do to overcome these barriers? What are the benefits if you do make the changes? And what is your level of commitment and time? I will allow myself how many months to achieve my success? Commitment. I will commit to accomplish this goal. And you sign it. You're signing it for yourself, not for me. Right. And finally, I give permission to my spouse, a friend, to hold me accountable. And you share this when we're done with that person.
Okay.
And in fact, you put it on your refrigerator.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's what we're going to be doing next. Your exercise, a little homework assignment. Take those 3 areas, flush them out a little bit more. And when you come back together, we'll go into developing a more specific plan.
So I have a question. So if I have, say, 3 areas that I need to work on that are key, I'm going to select just one that I want to work on initially?
You can, and we can duplicate this form. We could do 3, but we might want to just, and again, it depends upon you. You may feel that they mesh together perhaps.
Okay.
So the answer is it depends on what you come up with. But ultimately, we want to work on all 3 areas.
But would you suggest I maybe focus just on one initially?
Yes. It's always good to focus on one behavior, one concept to change. But again,
then if I may, then can we meet again and they maybe pick 2 different ones at different times and repeat the whole process again?
We can do that, and I think that's an excellent way to go. Once we get our next session together, you'll have a better idea of what we want to do next, and then we can go from there.
Okay, good. Well, I really appreciate this. Certainly give me lots to think about. And I have my marching orders, I see, to work and my homework, and that's great. And
I look forward to working with you so much.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now,
that's great.
have you paid your $350 yet? Okay. Well, let's terminate this. So thank you so much, and we'll talk next week.
Okay. Thank you, James.
Bye.
Good. Okay. Perfect. Well, that ends our role play. I'm going to keep the recording going. And
Okay.
before we have, I don't know if we had anyone new joining us. Is there anyone new joined in? Let me just check on our participants here. I think, okay, maybe not. Alrighty, thank you, James. And so, excuse me. Sorry, I probably wasn't the best person because I'm, it's hard working with a coach because you're like, I got all the solutions, I got it all figured out.
Yeah, I know. Well, you did a great job, and I think I hope that we communicated a style of interaction. But again, everybody has their style of interaction, and
yeah,
I think this got to the point where you really could see how it can really help people.
Absolutely, and I like it, and keeping in mind, and I'm going to speak now in a second to, for example, the application of this in our executive program. We're going to have people who are wellness backgrounds, like wellness coordinators or workplace wellness coordinators, a couple of them, and they're going to be very in tune with a lot of this. But I think it'll be interesting because, like myself, well, not everyone, but I'm fairly self-aware of myself and where my challenges are and limitations. It's enacting on them, it's putting them into action, right? And really working on them. And
do we want to open this up for any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm getting to that now. So so on that note, let's have everyone put themselves on the screen, and let's just have everyone turn on their cameras. And we're going to open this up now for some live discussion. And Stephanie, you're on the phone, so certainly. So what I'd like to do, just to start, are you still with us, James? I don't see you.
I am. I'm here.
Okay. So let's just quickly, just in like a minute or less, just go around and any comments or observations, quick questions. If there's any major questions, we'll defer it to after everyone had their little comments. So I'll start with Melody.
There we go. Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, it just did sound very much like what I've done with one-on-one clients. So yay.
Good. Hey, that's great.
Although, one of the questions that I was waiting for burning to hear you say, James, was, because some of this is in part, I think, part of Lisa's personality. I bet you've always been like this your whole life, Okay. So to say, is it important to her to address this or not? For example, I mean, the fact that you are aware and, standing up at the counter and eating and rushing through, like you're going to be the first to tell somebody, I am the executives, lead by example. So how important is that to you? Or do you you're just so aware and yeah, I should slow down and take, half an hour or whatever, but I don't have time for that. It's not important to me.
Well, if you look, that's a really good point. And we address that in the exercise. If you look at the exercises in the workbook, it does say, is this important to you? Right. Each item. And so when they come back, but you can ask it at any time. So it's a good point.
Really. Well, it is, because if it's not either A, important, or B, that they're committing to make a change, then you might as well move on to something else, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, it's probably the quintessential thing in coaching, right? You want to get to what they're prepared and committed to do, right?
Yeah, because Lisa, if you don't care about that, why put more pressure on yourself to make a change?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you're going to beat yourself up because, I know I shouldn't be doing that.
Or it's not that it's not important. It's just, it's not the highest priority of change for me right now, right?
And exactly. So, what if you put that one on the list of so what?
Yeah.
I've got bigger things that really I think mattered for me making a change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here's a question now for the group or James. What if there's something comes up that's not even showing up on the SMQ, but it's something that's really important, or they find a hard way, that they're not really finding a way where it shows up and manifests in the scores, but they still want to talk about it, right?
So, yeah, that's a good point. And I think because we did a role play here in a real world situation, the question that Melody just brought up and others are really relevant. And, that can happen. And in fact, if it's more important to talk about that than you do. So I think the SMQ is one way, but other things are going to happen. People are going to have other issues.
Yeah, or you may find you'll go off a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it's important for them, and you want to stay with that because we want to be client responsive, right? And address what's important, regardless of whether it shows up in the SMQ or not, because the SMQ may be a trigger for something that's not necessarily right in the
correct.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Thank you, Melody. Jill, was that again was that a valuable exercise for having us do that role play?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually haven't done, I did my own SMQ, but I haven't done it with anybody else. So it was really helpful to see that in action and see how the review of it.
Me too. Yeah, I found it, even though I was part of the process. Yeah. Anything else you want to comment or question?
No, I'm still like learning it myself, but yeah, I think that's really interesting to, what Melody was just saying, like how important are these things. And I'm just curious too, if there's, this is designed for working like with an individual or like the workplace, like does the workplace stress, is that part of that, the SMQ as well?
Well, if you're doing a workshop or a seminar that's more intensive, then the style and the approach is different. And there's a section in the resources where we actually talk about how you can use it in a workshop. Or if you're doing coaching in like a workplace coaching program, there's an interview with what's her name? She's down in Dubai. Help me out here, Lisa.
Kimmy.
Kimmy did a program, and we had a little bit of video interview of her, how she used it in with about 10 to 12 people in a corporation. And it was a coaching program, not a training program like a workshop. And that's a very helpful way to go. I think, you've got to tailor it a little bit differently in terms of how you do it. Yeah. So you
could do things like breakout groups and have them coach each other and peer coach. There's a lot of different creative ways you can, I'm sure, apply it, right?
Well, there are. We just finished one in Jordan with 2 banks. My Jordan guy, and he did it totally different than I do it. He did not give any feedback to any of the people who took the SMQ. They didn't get this initial profile. When you take the SMQ, you get your first little 1-page profile, and then he held that all back. And then when he met with them, he did a stress mastery, kind of what is stress all about. And then he got into giving everybody their reports and the information, and then they broke them into groups. And then he broke them into groups that were high on the anger, groups that high on tension, and then they all met together individually. Then they came back to the large group, and he said it went really well. That is as much as I know about what he did, and I hope to learn more because everybody has a different style.
Yeah, and I think it's also in keeping with training and workshop delivery. That what he did may not work with another group. It's really knowing your group, knowing their challenges, knowing the dynamics and what type of interplay will work well and type of group. A group may not work well. Maybe there's just too much contention between them, and maybe that wouldn't work. Who knows, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, Chandra, thank you, Jill.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed the interview process, I guess. I did like how much Jim asked you for your feedback on how you felt in regard to some of the questions. I think sometimes when people are filling out surveys, even if they're filling them out from their own perspective, they might not always understand the question. And I think that sometimes if we review how the questions are asked and sort of maybe how they could be perceived, sometimes it's easier if you can hear them back or hear somebody else talk about them. So I really like how you were able to offer in your own, sort of perspective and how you felt even after answering the question. Sometimes it's that aha moment.
Yeah. And absolutely. Going through that whole process, like you said, can trigger some ahas that maybe they never thought about before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you, Gail. And you're fairly new to all this too, Gail, because you just got on.
I was just going to say, I just signed up for the class. I just got the information from James, I believe, either yesterday or today.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. It was great to watch the two of you role play. It looks like something that will be really interesting to get more into, but I don't really have too much to say yet because this is.
And experience is going to be a really good teacher for all of us. And there's only, it's in the doing, right? And we're not always going to be as fluid at first, but that's okay, right? We learn and we evolve and we develop, and then we have each other to bounce ideas like James is doing now. So we'll have lots of time to practice before we actually get into this. And maybe even before we do the one-on-one coaching in the executive program, we can do like we did in the focus. We can do some peer coaching. I think
that would be very helpful. And I was going to get into this a little bit later, but I think the idea of each person doing some role play with each other would be very helpful.
Yeah, we did it with focus, but I think to do it with the SMQ would be a good idea before we get into, and I'll explain all that in a bit. Thank you, Gail. Sheena.
I just had, it was very helpful to see you guys do that. I had a couple of questions for James. Sometimes I find that, people, similar to Chandra was saying, people have a hard time sometimes sort of tuning in to their own feelings. I guess I wonder, do you find sometimes that people are surprised by the results, particularly when you said that you share it with someone else to get their perspective? Because I know sometimes, like with my husband and I see something from a completely different perspective from him. And when we look at it from each other's, it's just like, oh, gosh, I would never have thought of it that way, or I don't see myself that way. Just in your experience with it, since I haven't used it with clients.
I think it's an excellent way to go, and especially, and I will share this with Lisa and also with you, there is a companion form. It's identical to the SMQ, and it allows your husband or your wife or somebody to rate you on those same scales independently before they even see the results. Mm-hmm. Now, it can be scored, but the more important thing is to look at the individual items as they compare one-to-one. And I've had a good result with that, and some of my corporate clients who have used this that way, they've felt good about it. So I highly recommend it. Yeah, it can be either they're going to all agree, which then goes into, well, okay, now, as you said before, Melody, well, what is it? Is that important to you? Mm-hmm. Or there's disagreement on certain areas, and then becomes a discussion point. Well, how do you see, what do you mean you see me that way? Yeah. Not that way. Yeah. So, it gets a discussion going, a bit, especially when it's somebody close to you, and you can actually do some kind of work with that.
Yeah, and I think what's important too, before anyone, because really, if the person's not open to hearing feedback, it's really a wash. Why bother, right? So I think both parties have to be very mature, emotionally mature about getting into something like that. That's kind of a given. Doesn't always happen. But the person asking for the feedback, if we are coaching them, we would obviously want to coach them on, do your best to be really open to the feedback you're going to get and see if there's some truth. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't want to accept it at first, but if we really are honest with ourselves, there's probably some truth there that someone's, mirroring back what they see, right? And
one of the reasons any assessment can be very good, and you know this in other areas, is that it does reveal what you say. It's hard to argue with yourself when you're the one who responded to that at that level, and whether it's a health questionnaire or whatever. So it really kind of opens up the door for open discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a great tool. And just for those who don't know, I think most of you may, James' tool, the SMQ, within the past year has been, I don't know if accredited or recognized by the help me out, James.
Well, the American Institute of Stress evaluated the SMQ, did a study of it, and gave us their stamp of approval. In fact, we're the only tool recognized by AIS right now, and they've been around for 40 years. It was started by Hans Selye. It was started by Herbert Benson. It was started by people who were in the beginning. It's like many years old. They get over 100,000 hits to their website every month.
And if I may ask, James, do you have something written up that we could use with our clients that attests to that and just gives them a little background now on the legitimacy of your, not that it wasn't legitimate.
Well, no, I understand. Yeah, I certainly can provide that.
Yeah, I think you might have something just to pull it out of your hat.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, the high level we're going to be working at, right? They're going to want, well, how, I think going through they'll recognize the credence and the value of it.
Well, it's nice to have an independent organization accredit you, just like as associates, you have the benefit of, we have a pretty good reputation. In fact, it's a very good reputation. So you can leverage that in your marketing, in your communication. And I think I encourage you to do that, because we all need to have independent verification. It helps.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, James, have you ever had companies use this companion piece as not so much a companion piece, but doing like peer assessments? And I'll explain where I'm coming from on this, because years ago when I was at MCAP, I was sent on a leadership development program at the Niagara Institute. This is like one of those ridiculously like $10,000 plus.
I know.
Offsites. Yeah, it was really amazing. But before I went and after the program and so much, there was some follow-up to it. But I had to it was part of this 360 assessment.
Yeah.
And so it was about all of my, how I worked and, interacted with people. And I think the stress assessment itself, like the SMQ in that context, like especially if it's been used in the workplace for if you've got problem managers who need to work on how they interact with people, if this was ever used in that context. Do you know what
I do. Well, a lot of my corporate clients don't tell me what they do, but yes, it has been used that way. I know that I believe it was Speedway, the big Speedway convenience store chain. They've been using it for 6 years. And they did in the beginning use the paper and pencil form, and they used the companion form, but they didn't do a 360. And these are great ideas. I would like to see that happen, perhaps as we go forward. I have a lot on my plate right now, but I like these ideas because I think they're very helpful.
And I got a background in HR and rolling out 360 programs and training and development. And so I'm, all these things, ideas are already coming to my head. And so, sometimes you can sell a program just as a stress mastery to senior level leadership. Let's just talk about that target group. But you could also frame it as a personal effectiveness or, workplace effectiveness, and then embed that, because stress management is a big criterion factor involved in our effectiveness in our life and so you can position it, package it in different ways, but just slip that tool in there, right? So there's a lot of different approaches and strategies and tactics that we can take, and we'll probably, through going through the executive program, we'll probably get a lot of illuminations and ahas and insights from ourselves, but also from those participating. And I'll always be asking and checking in, like, how do you see this potentially a tool working in your organization? Then you'll get some more ideas for how you can market it to an organization.
Well, I think you're right, and I would say that I'm going to, if I have a moment, I would like to show it. If not, I can talk about it. But we're now providing spreadsheets to companies when they do a program with 15, 20, or 30 people. I actually put this together myself. It shows every single individual on the spreadsheet with their highs and high scores all across the continuum, which allows for the leadership to do more planning with the corporations that they're working with. So, like, for example, my guy in Jordan, Rand, has with the Jordan Bank, they have 27. So we're showing them some tremendously powerful information that they can, as an independent consultant to the company, can sit down and say, okay, here's what we've learned. Here are some areas that are of concern. What do you think we should be doing? What do you want to do about that? So it's almost like planning.
Yeah, and it's almost like the employee needs assessment we talk about in workplace wellness, because it can really reveal a lot about potential areas where there's an aggregate of common areas and challenges. Okay, I think based on this, I would suggest and propose to you, Mr. Employer, that here's 2 or 3 key areas you might want to consider bringing into your organization for soft skills development or workplace wellness development. And also, just to, probably goes without saying, but just to what you were saying, when you show a report like that, I think you might have said that, but just for clarity, the employees are all de-identified, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and that's important. I mean, you never want to take anything for face value or just assume things. So just always make that known to the employee and the organization that all aggregated data is all de-identified. And Stephanie, are you still on the phone?
Yeah, I'm here, and I actually would love to give a little feedback before I have to jump into my mastermind group.
Yes, go ahead.
I absolutely, I was only listening, so I couldn't see, kind of any facial reactions or anything, but I loved hearing, and I think when I can just tune in and not have to see, it helps me tune in a little bit more and be a little more, aware of what's happening. I thought it was fantastic. Okay. I have not taken the quiz or the test, so I really need to better understand how to do that. So James, let me touch in with you tomorrow if I can.
You can. That'd be good.
And then I need to order the book and stuff so I can get kind of ahead of the game. But I thought it was fantastic. One of the things, Lisa, you made the comment of it's really hard maybe for some of these wellness people when they're in it, they kind of, you know how that feeling is. We're already in that program, so we may be thinking ahead.
Yeah.
But what's really intriguing to me, and I'll take my experience as a yogi.
Yeah.
When I'm teaching classes, right, I'm teaching, I'm on my game and all that kind of stuff, so I'm leading. But when I get to go to an actual workshop and I have to participate as a participant and do the yoga and think from a different perspective,
right,
it really changes that a lot. So I think what you may see in a lot of the workplace wellness people that may be participating, we should encourage them to think as a participant, yes, not maybe as that wellness person. Absolutely. They're going to always take that lens because that's, yes, their job, but
absolutely,
it really, and I just, coming from that past week where I was the participant for, yes, 60 hours, it really helps change your lens. So I think that's really the power in the program.
Yes, absolutely. Really good point. And if I forget, and I don't think I will, but if I do, let's really make that top of mind recall when we go into the program, and in a very, very obviously very respectful way, we'll articulate that to everyone. And, I would probably do that anyway, because we are going to have people who are used to being trainers themselves. And I know myself, when I'm a trainer and I go into have to be a participant, it's a lot of self-restraint and constraint on my behalf, because I just want to be given all the answers. And I was like, no, Lisa, you are here to learn. You're not here to project your ideas or what you think should be done, right? So that's a really, really good observation there, Stephanie. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, Stephanie, be happy to talk to you tomorrow. Just send me an email.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I just have a few more things, and
I'm going to jump off.
Okay, James.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everyone being here today. Thank you so much. And
Thanks,
I look forward to future communication, and I'm available whenever you feel you want to touch base.
Yeah. Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
So guys, I won't keep you much longer. As I've indicated in an email just recently,